Today we are going to be building a $350 gaming PC that'll play all titles at 1080p with smooth FPS. And the biggest star of today is the GTX 980 Ti. You can pick these up on the used market for under $200 US. Now the one that we got here, we got it on a deal in Tokyo for $150 roughly in a used PC parts hunt that we recently did. And some of the other key components that we picked up here is the 4770K. This is a great CPU even in today's modern standards. 4 cores, 8 threads, going to be perfectly fine for playing those games. And then we've got 16 gigabytes of DDR3 memory, a budget H81M motherboard, a 500 watt power supply, 500 gigabyte SSD, and of course with the case and the cooler, which we got used as well. So I'll throw up the total prices that we paid for these parts, but I'll also throw up on the right hand side of your screen what you could expect to pay if you just bought these parts, buy it now on the internet. So you can see there the discrepancy between buying local deals and buying it straight off the internet at buy it now is roughly $100 difference. But with that aside, let's build this thing up, see if we come into any problems with this configuration, and if there are any problems, we'll iron them out just like we did in the previous gaming budget PC that we did with the GTX 970. So let's get this attack yes party started.
Are you tired of seeing this annoying activate Windows message? Then if so, today's video sponsor SCD Keys has you covered. For as little as $14 using the coupon code BFTYC, you can get activated today. Works for Windows 11 Pro too. Links in the description below.
And this gaming PC is now finished. We are benchmarking it on the CPU side of things. Just to test stability, we'll also run a benchmark on the graphics card, which is pretty important just to gauge the temperatures and also gauge how much power consumption is being used. However, in the case of the CPU, we've also gone an extra step here and we've undervolted this 4770K. You may be like, well, why would you undervolt? We want more performance. And this has to do with the fact that we've used a very cheap motherboard. It's a H81 and it's one of the cheaper H81 versions as well. So out of the box, this was going near 100 watts with the 4770K at 3.7 gigahertz. And so what I realized in the BIOS is if we keep that 3.7 gigahertz locked in, what we can then do is essentially drop the voltage that's going to the CPU. And after doing this, we've now got our power consumption down to 84 watts on the CPU. So it's using less power, giving out the exact same performance. And of course, we're going to have a cooler running CPU too. But speaking of temperatures, we don't need to delid this i7 4770K. The temperatures are absolutely fine. And the good thing is too, is this Scythe cooler that we got for it for $7 at the junk store. This is running perfectly as well. Very quiet. The whole build is just whisper quiet. But of course, with that aside, let's boot up some games and see how this thing performs. And after playing some games for a few hours and running some benchmarks, I am extremely impressed with how this PC performed at 1080p. The first benchmark we decided to do was Battlefield 1, and here we had a range of high and low settings. I tested it at both resolutions just to give you guys an idea of if, say, you want to play competitively and you don't mind turning the graphics settings down, what FPS you can expect to get, as well as if the game is stuttering with the 1% and 0.1% lows. And here it did a fine job at 1080p. I was actually very impressed with how the GTX 980 Ti performs, not just the card itself, which we might make a dedicated video for, but also in relation to how it performs with the i7-4770K. The next game we decided to test was, of course, the age-old favorite Fortnite, and the reason I mainly test this game is because when I sell the PC, everyone always wants to know how Fortnite performs. But since I'm in Japan at the moment, I think the meta here is Apex Legends. It is definitely for PC gaming at the moment, I feel the most popular game in Japan, where everyone I talk to who asks me, oh, what you into? I say, oh, I like PC gaming. And they say, oh, have you played Apex Legends? And they call it Apexu over here. And so benchmarking that is equally as important as Fortnite, and here's where it did an absolutely fine job. We're getting over 120 average FPS in this game with a blend of high and low settings. But going back to Fortnite, here is where the game ran a lot smoother at the low settings with the epic view distance. I still find Fortnite just hammers those, especially 0.1% lows, where it just seems to stutter randomly. And I do think it's mounting to the level where I actually want to investigate this game with different hardware setups and see what the exact problem is and why it stutters. But it does play a lot better at the low settings than it does at the high settings. However, that out of the way, I decided to test a new benchmark called Easy Bench, and this is essentially the Unreal Engine 5, and they're making a benchmark that you can test at different resolutions, so 1080p, 1440p, or 4K, or even ultra wide if you dare wish to. And what we found here was this PC was having a hard time doing this benchmark at 1080p. We're scoring on average 20 FPS. But the funny thing about this benchmark is that it's going to be an indicator of future performance, at least on the high end, in terms of resolutions and what games are coming out in the future. Say for instance, there's this latest and greatest game that uses Unreal Engine 5 and it's got all the graphics settings cranked up, then you can expect to, maybe on this setup, get around 20 FPS in that game. However, I'd like to see this benchmark maybe add some low, medium, and high settings and different settings, just so you can gauge what the future capability of the gaming PC will be, as I found this benchmark is definitely stressing the hardware as much as it can. However, you may have noticed also while we were benchmarking this PC, the temperatures were really good, and also when I was playing, the noise was extremely good. I've got this PC on in the background at the moment, and it's just pretty much near whisper quiet, and that just shows that even on a budget, you can get decent looks out of a computer as well as decent performance in terms of not just the maximum FPS, but as well as keeping things low noise and good temperatures. So in my opinion, today's build was just one of my favorite that I've done in a long time. We've got that minimalist look going on, but at the same time, it definitely brings more than minimal, especially for that price point of 350 USD. Though going into this build, I was actually worried about the motherboard, the H81 from Gigabyte. This was actually an OEM that was assigned to a company here that makes gaming PCs called Mouse Computer. At least when I checked Hardware Monitor and running the benchmarks, it was saying Mouse Computer in the description of the motherboard. So that was very interesting to see that Gigabyte did OEM some of their budget boards to these boutique manufacturers here in Japan. But that aside, I was worried that it would throttle the 4770K when it came to not just gaming, but also especially the more heavier benchmarks on the CPU like Cinebench. And here I was pleasantly surprised, especially after we undervolted it, that it could handle the 4770K at 3.7 gigahertz all core. And so in order to do that, we undervolted the CPU 100 millivolts, and that did the job. We couldn't go any lower than that to test if maybe lower voltages would help the situation even more if it could handle it, because that was the maximum on the motherboard and that's what it had to offer. And I actually tried playing around with some different settings and it just pretty much bugged out. We couldn't do a whole lot more. In other words, if you wanted to undervolt on this motherboard that we're showing in the video today, you can pretty much only get there just by changing that 1 voltage setting, and it's limited to minus 100 millivolt. Though in terms of the two 8GB sticks of DDR3 memory, there was actually no XMP profiles to lock in, so I manually locked in 1600 megahertz, CL10, 10, 10, and then 30 on the timings, which did work absolutely fine. And I noticed, especially when it came to Apex Legends, one of the games that I used to test if a computer's really running smooth and it's stable, since the engine itself is very well optimized for PC, I found that there was no stuttering on the 1% and 0.1% lows, which is what we want if we're playing PC games, especially multiplayer games. Anyway, with that aside, I hope you guys enjoyed today's budget $350 US gaming PC. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button. Also, let us know in the comment section below, do you think this PC is perfect for the money, or would you change some things, or have you built something recently for a similar price point? If so, what did you get for the dollar? Love reading those thoughts and opinions as always, just like this question of the day here, which comes from Alan D. And they ask, hey Brian, just wondering, has the Japanese second-hand market changed nowadays with regards to cultural aspects? I remember a while ago that in Japan, second-hand items were seen as not desirable, sometimes disposable, even though in perfectly working order. Cheers. So to answer that one directly in terms of my experience recently versus years ago, basically over 10 years ago, used products were definitely not desirable for especially native Japanese, but a lot of foreigners I think have come to Japan. They don't mind so much buying used hardware, especially if the price is right. When I came here initially, I had a field day. It was like just a Christmas shopping experience all over Japan. Products that were labeled as junk, essentially no claim, no return, were looking pretty good on the shelves, and the price was just a fraction of that of new. And so you could definitely get a really good bargain. But nowadays, I think the culture has changed a little bit in favor of picking up used stuff. I don't think it's as frowned upon as it was back in the day. And I think that's a good change for the better, where instead of consuming all this new stuff, you can recycle the used stuff, get some more usage out of it. But I feel like the bargains in the used stuff here are definitely out of the tech scene itself, where I feel like enthusiast gaming PC tech parts have the biggest premium on them in terms of used versus other products. For instance, I recently got an AT2035, a condenser microphone for like $40, and it had a 6-month warranty on it, and this thing looked like it was in pristine condition. I also got a used audio interface. There was originally maybe $200 when it first came out. Got that for around $30. So I think a lot of bargains in the used field are outside of the gaming tech space. That's what I've been finding. I think in the gaming tech space itself, the prices are a bit elevated, because I think there's just such a big demand, especially when we see this Apex Legends boom going on in Japan. A lot of people want to build a gaming PC, and so they don't mind saving a few bucks going used. But in that way, it does add to the demand, and that increases the price of the used products in the gaming PC tech space. Anyway, hope that answers that question. Sorry if it was a bit lengthy of an answer, but love talking about this stuff with you guys. And with that aside, if you stayed this far and you're enjoying that Tech Yes content, then be sure to hit that sub button, ring that bell, and I'll catch you guys in another one very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.